Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by the guy called Christoph, who is the XO. Hey, Christoph.
Hey, Dale. That is me. I am called Christoph and the XO, so thank you for introducing me appropriately. Appreciate that, Captain. So,
Of course.
I'm very excited to dig in today.
Why is that?
Well, it's of all the Navy history podcasts in the world, this one is my favorite.
Okay.
And why
Cool.
wouldn't I want to jump into my favorite Navy history podcast?
I don't know. You brought it up. So I was just trying to get some clarification.
Okay. No, that's fair. I think that's fair. And you know what? That's one of the reasons I love this podcast is because you are fair.
So, last time we talked about the crossing of the Delaware, and that finished out New York for us. So now we're going to get into the Saratoga campaign. So are you ready to get underway?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to get a little bit into the British strategery right now. So towards the end of 1776, there were a lot of people in England that thought that the pacification of New England was going to be very, very, very hard because of how many patriots were actually up there. So the British leadership, in all their intelligence, set their sights on the central and southern states where the loyalists were more plentiful. And so they were like, well, maybe we just try to isolate New England and that'll be the best thing to do.
Not a bad strategy, I guess.
Yeah. So in December, General John Burgoyne got to London and he began meeting with a guy named Lord Germain, who was the British Secretary of State for the colonies and the government official responsible for managing the war. And, their meetings were to discuss their military plans for 1777. There were two main armies in North America that they had to, maneuver around and to use. There was General Guy Carleton's army in Quebec, and they had successfully driven back the American invasion of Canada. Remember when we talked about that?
I do. And I'm kind of okay with that. Canada, it's worked out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Then there was also General William Howie's army. And this is the guy that had driven Washington's army from New York City. Remember when we talked about that?
I do. Howie is a surprising figure. Like, there's a lot of times he would do something that was a head scratcher. Like, why wouldn't you just complete the job right there? But then there were other times I'm like, well, that was better than I thought, better than I would have expected out of a general. So I'm curious to dive in to see what he does in the Saratoga campaign.
Yes. So speaking of Howie, he wrote to Germain outlining a very ambitious plan for his campaign in the 1777. He said that if Germain sent him, a huge amount of reinforcements, he could launch a number of different offenses. He wanted to send 10,000 men up the Hudson River to take Albany. And then in autumn, he would gather his troops and capture the capital of Philadelphia, or he would capture Philadelphia, which is the rebel capital. Now, he did change his mind after writing the letter pretty quickly, because he realized any reinforcements would probably arrive too late. And when the Continental Army retreated during the winter, this made Philadelphia a increasingly vulnerable target. So Howie was like, you know what, guys? I'm gonna go capture Philadelphia
Nice.
instead. Yeah, I'm Albany can wait. I'm going for Philly. And he did send Jermaine a revised plan, which Jermaine didn't even get till February.
So for the younger listeners, there wasn't really an undo button for these letters. So when he sent it and then regretted it, it would be months before the guy actually got it. So try to see if you can internalize that, because that was the reality of the time, which still blows my mind.
Yeah, today's age of instant communication.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go over to General Burgoyne. He brings up a plan that had been discussed by a number of different British generals, which was an attempt to divide the American colonies by a invasion from Quebec. Now, this had already been attempted by General Carleton in 76, but he did stop short of a full-scale invasion because, winter was coming on,
Yeah.
and we don't fight in the cold.
No. That's so gauche, frankly.
Well, it's just trying to do it in that kind of harsh
Yeah.
conditions.
Your guys it's already difficult enough. I mean, looking in Russia. Not great.
No. So Carleton was heavily criticized in London because he didn't take advantage of the retreat from Quebec. And, Germain, he really did not like him in the first place anyway. So because of this rivalry and his failed attempt to capture Charleston, South Carolina, this gave Burgoyne a very good opportunity to be able to seize command. So when he was asked to submit a plan, he outlined a number of different strategies in a paper that he called, quote, Thoughts for Conducting the War on the Side of Canada. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that seems super passive aggressive. It's like, yeah, things aren't going great. But here's just some thoughts. You don't have to do anything with them, or I'm just gonna say some things of how I think it should go. Yeah, I don't know. Politics were
Well,
alive and well, even then.
yes. So he submits this to Lord Germain also in February. And Germain approved this plan with a couple of modifications. But he succeeded in getting command, which is why Howie and him are in command for 1777. Harry Clinton, when he was demoted, he was given a knighthood, because they felt bad for him.
Well, that's a pretty good parting gift, I think.
Yeah. And then he was sent over to Howie to serve under him.
Okay.
And guess what? They didn't get along very well either.
I imagine they wouldn't.
Now, Burgoyne was very confident that he was going to succeed. So confident, in fact, that he bet a friend 50 guineas that he would return victorious within a year.
That's pretty bold. You know what the street value of guineas are?
No, tell me.
It's a lot. No, I don't know. Do you mean like the fowl, the bird? Or is this slang for money?
No, that's money.
Okay. I was thinking, hey, I've got all these birds, and I'll bet you 50 of them. It's a pretty niche bet. You have to bet another guinea owner. Anyway, I'm glad it's money. It's a lot easier to transfer.
So that would mean that in 2015, his bet would be about $2,640.
That's a sizable bet.
That is a sizable bet.
And that's in gold coins, too. So, nice.
So his plan from Quebec had two components. He would lead a main force of about 8,000 south from Montreal along Lake Champlain and the Hudson River Valley, and have a second column of about 2,000 would move from Lake Ontario east down the Mohawk River Valley, and this was going to be his diversion.
Okay.
And then they would both converge on Albany, where they would link up with troops from Howie's army marching up from the Hudson.
Okay.
Now, the control of the Lake Champlain, Lake George, and Hudson River route from Canada to New York City, this would completely cut off New England from the rest of the colonies.
That's a pretty good strategy.
Yes. So the last part of the proposal, the advance by Howie, this was the most controversial part of the campaign. Because then, he has to make Howie do what he's told.
Oh.
Yes. Now, Germain approved his plan after having received Howie's letter, in which Howie said that he would not be able to support the Northern Army until later in the year, after, he took Philadelphia.
Right.
Now, whether Germain actually told Burgoyne, who was in London at that time, about Howie's revised plans, we really don't know. Some sources claim that he did, and others say that he did not. Those sources say that he wasn't told until the campaign was very, very deep underway.
I'm guessing transatlantic mail is even slower than continental mail. Just a guess.
Depends.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. They had reliable shipping to and fro, but depending on where you lived, you could live in the boonies of somewhere, and I'm sure it'd be difficult to get to. Especially if the address is illegible. That's the worst. It's like, what is this zip code?
Not only that, but when there's a war on.
Yeah, that does kind of interfere with... You think that the mail people would get a pass, but I guess then you'd have a bunch of soldiers dressed as mailmen. That would never do.
Well, not only that, but military mail was handled by the military.
That makes more sense. You don't want it falling into the hands of civilians. Because you don't know their loyalties. That's why.
Yeah. We also don't know whether Germain, Howie, and Burgoyne had the same expectations about how much Howie was supposed to support the invasion from Quebec. Some argue that Howie failed to follow instructions and pretty much just abandoned Burgoyne's army, while others suggest that Burgoyne failed on his own and tried to say, no, it's not my fault, it's Howie's and Clinton's fault. But what we do know for a fact is that Germain just gave his generals way too much latitude. And he did not clearly define the overall strategy. And, this is highlighted by a letter sent by Germain to Howie. This was dated April 2nd, where he approved Howie's plan for Philadelphia, but he stressed that, quote, it will be executed in time for you to cooperate with the army, ordered to proceed from Canada, and put itself under your command.
Oh. That's interesting. I've not heard too much of that in the past where a general will coordinate the transfer of their forces to another, well, I don't know. I find that surprising, especially since he fought so hard to get control of that army. You would think he would be more possessive.
And didn't even know about any of this. He never received a copy of the instructions.
Oh, interesting.
What he did receive was a letter on May 6th from Lord Germain, which introduced the plan but didn't have all the details.
I hear that's where the devil
So,
is. It's in the
yeah.
detail.
So, Euron was a lieutenant general at this time, and while he technically outranked Major General Charlton, but Charlton was still the governor of Quebec, and Germain's instructions to them specifically limited Carleton's role to operations in Quebec. So Carleton considered this a slight on him. And this combined with his failure to get command of the expedition, he decided, you know what, screw this, I'm done. And resigned.
Wow.
Well, let's get over to the American strategy. George Washington, commander in chief.
Mm-hmm.
His army was encamped at Morristown, New Jersey. And, of course, he did not have a good picture of what the British were planning for the next year. The principal question was what Howie's movement in New York was going to be. They also had no idea what the British in Quebec was going to do, even though Biron complained that everyone in Montreal knew what he was planning. So none of the American generals could agree on what his most likely movement was. And Congress was like, you know what? They're probably going to go to New York by sea. So partly because of result of this indecision and the fact that it would be isolated from its supply line if Howe moved north, the garrisons at Fort Ticonderoga and the guys in the Mohawk and Hudson Valleys, their forces were not increased very much.
That makes sense.
They did send a large regiment to Fort Sandwich, which is in the upper Mohawk Valley. This was as a step in defending the British movements in the area. Washington also ordered 4 regiments to the Peekskill, which is in New York. And that way he could either direct them north or south, depending on what the British do.
That's pretty smart. Yeah, dealing with that kind of... There's so many ways the British could approach and so many targets they could attack that, and having such a limited number of troops on and their enlistments were expiring, and like, okay, so we have these guys now, what do we do with them now? That's a lot of tough decisions. I'm surprised Congress chimed in, but I guess that's an old American tradition that we still see today. We should do this.
So let's get into the campaign, because guess what? It's starting. So most of Burgoyne's army arrives at Quebec in the spring of 1776. And they participated in the routing of the Continental Army. In addition to the British regulars, the troops of Quebec included several regiments from the German principalities of Hesse, which is where the term Hessian comes from.
I was wondering about that.
Well, technically it's Hesse. It's Hessian.
I guess if you called it, that's a little long. Doesn't roll off the tongue. So you want to cut that a little shorter. Just,
Yeah. Also, there were Brunswick Germans there as well. So that means there were about 200 British regulars and then 300 to 400 Germans. they were assigned to the St. Leger's Mohawk Valley expedition, which left about 3,500 men in Quebec to protect the province. So the remaining forces were then assigned to Burgoyne for the campaign to Albany. The regular forces were supposed to be augmented by as many as 2,000 militia raised in Quebec. And by June, Carleton had managed to raise only 3 small companies. They were also expecting as many as 1,000 Native Americans to support them, and they had about 500 joining them between Montreal and Crown Point. Now, of course, once they started going, they immediately had transportation difficulties. They hadn't even left Quebec when it started.
Well, I guess the governor is part of the military, and you could complain directly to him. It's like, what's up with your roads?
Yeah. Now, the expedition expected to travel mainly over water, so there weren't very many wagons, horses, or other draft animals available to move a large amount of equipment and
I
supplies
see.
on the land portions of the route. They finally, in June, issue orders to procure carts in sufficient enough numbers to move them. But the carts were poorly constructed. They used mainly green wood. And the teams that drove the carts were civilians. So, anything that happens, they're like, nope, I'm out. Peace.
That's true. I was like, what's the problem? Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, I see. So
They're going to
civilians can drive
run.
horses or carts but
Yeah, but the first sign of trouble, they're like, I'm out.
yeah, I've got other priorities.
Yeah. So on June 13th, Buron and Charlton, they review the forces they have assembled at St. John's on the Richelieu River. And that is when Burgoyne is ceremonially given command. I'm finally in charge. So they have 5 sailboats that they had built the previous year. They originally had 9, but they had been captured after the Battle of Valcour Island.
Oh,
So that left them with 5. These provided some transport and, military cover for all the transport boats. And they moved south on the lake.
nice.
So when they make landfall, Buron launches about 7,000 regulars,
Wow.
130 artillery pieces, ranging from light mortars to 24-pound pieces.
That's a lot of stuff on 5 boats. Like, I guess I'm having an incorrect
Those
mental image of the size of these ships.
those were fighting boats. There's also lots of
Oh,
transports.
okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. So 3,900 regulars went to the right and 3,100 to the left. Now, they were really good condition. They were happy. They were go-lucky. But some of the German dragoons, they weren't very happy because they figured out pretty quickly they were not very well equipped for wilderness fighting.
I could see that. And just to clarify, dragoons are mostly mounted troops, right, with armor?
Yeah, it's mounted infantry. So, light cavalry.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, Buron's army travels up from the lake and occupies the fort called Fort Crown Point that they just moved in because it was undefended. Now, the Native Americans that were with him did screening activities, and they were very, very, very effective at this because it kept the Americans from learning all the details of their movements. So General Arthur St. Clair is left in command of Fort Ticonderoga with and the surrounding defenses with about 3,000 men, a mix of regulars and militia. And they had no idea that on July 1st, the full might of the British Army was just 4 miles away.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how I would feel. But I guess if you didn't know, you would think everything's fine. But I mean, just an imminent danger is so close. 4 miles is, I mean, that's an hour's walk, really.
Well, probably a little bit longer with,
Oh, all the
army
stuff. Yeah, yeah,
maneuvering,
yeah.
but
And you want to do it in formation, so do it right. Okay, yeah, maybe 2 hours walk.
so St. Clair's orders were to hold out for as long as possible. Well, he also had planned out two avenues of retreats
Nice.
because, you hold out as long as possible, but then you get the heck
Oh,
out of there.
right.
Okay, so the skirmishing begins on the outer defenses on July 2nd. And by the 4th, most of the garrison was either in the fort or nearby at Mount Independence.
All right.
The so what they didn't know was when they withdrew from an outer defensive position, this cleared the way for the British to place artillery on the hilltop known as Sugar Loaf. And this hill had a commanding view of the fort.
That's not good. I mean,
No.
if you're a fort resident.
St. Clair, once he saw the British cannon getting set up on Sugarloaf on the 5th, he was like, you know what, guys? We have held out as long as possible. We're getting out of here tonight. So that left the fort ready for capture.
Nice.
And the British, they move in.
I mean, nice from a British perspective, not nice from an American one.
So they come in July 6th. Now, of course, this was pretty much uncontested. And so this caused a uproar with the public and the politicians. There was a investigation later, and it did clear anybody of any wrongdoing with the retreat.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like they did what they were supposed to do.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they would have been like, well, you guys should at least give it a little bit of a go.
Yeah.
But I mean,
They,
you got artillery overlooking you.
right.
All they got to do is just sit there and siege. I'm glad that they cleared them.
Yeah. You can use those men for something else more productive.
So during the retreat, Burgoyne, he sends out forces to pursue them. And St. Clair, had two different routes. And the British did catch up with the retreating troops at least 3 times. This ended up being the Battle of Hubbardton, a skirmish at the rear at Pearson's Long, and a skirmish at Skenesborough. Then there was a standoff in the Battle of Fort Anne on the 8th. And the forward company of the British Army was nearly decimated during this one. Now, the cost of this was about 50% more to the Americans than the British in casualties.
Really? Ugh.
But they did demonstrate to the British officers there that the Americans are capable of putting up a very stiff resistance. And they reduced the British army there by about 1,500 men.
Dang. And that is a non-professional army going up against a professional one. I think that's significant.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So being gone, he settles into a house of a guy named Philip Skene, Scarsborough. And he was a loyalist. So he was like, yes, please come in,
Okay,
Mr.
yeah.
Lobsterback.
I wasn't sure the situation because it's like, yeah, when you take over a place, did he just say, okay, you're out, I'm living here now? Or, yeah, I guess he was welcomed in by the loyalists. That's,
Yes.
yeah.
So while he was waiting for his army to regroup, he was like, what am I going to do next? And so he wrote some letters. He described the British victory that he wanted to have published for the public. And when the news reached Europe, King George was very happy. He's like, ho ho, we win.
Nice. Yeah, well, maybe a little premature, but
But the French did not like this news because this pretty much stopped a early proposal for the French to get into the war.
oh,
Yeah, they had been thinking about getting in even sooner than they did. And of course, the news ticked off Congress and the American public
yeah, I imagine it did, yes.
because there were some slanders in there that said that St. Clair and Schuyler had been bribed.
Oh, no.
Hmm. So on July 10th, Burgoyne issues orders for his next series of movements. Most of his guys would take the rough road from Skenesborough to Fort Edward while going through Fort Anne, and his heavy artillery was going to be transported down to Lake George to Fort Edward. Some troops were sent back up the road towards Castleton as a diversion to try to say that they were aiming for the Connecticut River instead. Now, Burgoyne's decision to move the army over land was curious because it contradicted his commentaries on planning the expedition that he did earlier. Because he observed that defenders could easily block their route. Now, his decision seemed to have been motivated by two factors. One, that moving the army over water via Lake George would require a retrograde movement,
Okay.
which could be perceived as a retreat. You don't want to be looking like you're retreating.
Well, so, but that could be like a feint, right? Like you could withdraw, they could think you're retreating, and then as they try to pursue you, you could trap them, even if you are doing a strategic move across a lake. So, what was the big, and as a never been in the military guy, what is the big deal with being perceived as retreating?
All the eyes are on there. It could be like, oh, the British are retreating. We're winning again. Then that word gets back to Britain. Oh, there he's retreating, but he just said he had this huge victory. He obviously lied.
Oh, I see.
Let's replace him. You're fired.
Man, fake news, am I right?
Yeah. Now, the other reason is because of Philip Skene. He was going to benefit by the road that Bjorn's going to have to build to move his army. So the guy's like, hey, if you go by this, do this road, you're going to help me out because now I got a road right here.
Right.
Everybody's going to be visiting me. And I can sell all my stuff. I can put it in here. I mean, it's going to be great for me.
Yeah, that makes, I mean, that's just so interesting how things play out.
Yeah. So General Schuyler, he's at Albany when he receives words of Ticonderoga's fall. And he's like, immediately gets on a horse and goes to Fort Edward. He decided he was going to make Bjorgon's passage as difficult as possible. He used an axe as his weapon because it was much easier to fall large trees in the enemy's path than to remove them after they were down.
Nice. Yeah.
So this makes Bjorgon's advance slow to a crawl. It also tires out his troops, which forces them to use more supplies.
That's really brilliant. That's such a simple strategy, but the impact on the enemy is so great.
Yeah. So Bjorgon, he writes a letter to Lord Germain with lots of complaints. He's saying all those Americans, they're systematically falling trees. They're destroying bridges. They're damming streams along the road to Fort Edward. Can you make them stop?
No.
Schuyler Schuyler also does scorched earth tactics. This was to deny the British access to local provisions.
It was so I was under the impression Scorched Earth was more of an 1800s type strategy and going forward. I didn't This is kind of the first time I've heard about it earlier than that. Is this one of the earlier, I guess, demonstrations of that or in recorded history? I imagine probably been
Oh,
going on for a long time.
yeah, no, this is not. Scorched earth has been a tactic from almost the very beginning.
Okay. The Civilization series has lied to me. That's okay. I'll get over it.
Usually, usually it's employed by the invaders coming in, scorching earth before they leave.
Ah,
But
from a defensive
yeah,
standpoint. Okay. Okay, well, maybe a Civilization is now back in my good graces. Thank you, Dale.
you're welcome. Now, but just because the main column of British troops were, you know, crawling in essence, his scouts were not. So the scouts were able to harass the work crews.
Oh, smart. Like replace their axes with rubber axes? Classic.
Tactics required hit Birgon to build a road through the wilderness for his guns and troops. This took 2 weeks.
Whoa.
They finally moved out of Skenesborough and reached Fort Edward on July 29th. And they find that Schuyler had already abandoned it. They retreated to Stillwater, New York.
That was a pretty effective series of things to harass them. And then when they finally get there after expending so much energy, it's like, oh, there's nothing here.
Yeah. He's like, "Darn it."
That's awesome.
All right, we're going to talk about St. Leger's expedition before we end it for today.
Alrighty.
So, Lieutenant Colonel St. Leger sailed up the St. Lawrence and crossed Lake Ontario to arrive at Oswego. Didn't have any trouble with this. He had about 300 regulars, and he was supported by about 650 Canadian and Loyalist militia.
Wow.
They were also joined by about 1,000 Native Americans. Well, I guess if it's Ontario, it would be Native Canadians.
Yeah, I guess. Well, America in the sense that the continents are called Americans. So, like,
All right, we'll
you
stay
stay
with
with
that then.
Native Americans or Aboriginal Americans, if you will.
So these guys were led by John Butler and the Iroquois war chiefs, Joseph Brant. Oh, I'm going to butcher this and I apologize. Iwata. I know I butchered that. Again, I apologize. And the last guy is Corn Planter. They leave Oswego on July 25th and they march towards Fort Stanwix, which is on the Mohawk River. And they start besieging it. Got besieging going. On August 2nd, about 800 members of the Tryon County Militia and their Native American allies march in to relieve the siege. But they get ambushed by some of St. Leger's British and Native Americans on August 6th. And this was the Battle of Orensky. Now, the Americans, they held the field, but they end up retreating because of heavy casualties, which is why usually when this battle is described, it starts with the word bloody.
Yeah, that's never a good thing.
They also lose their leader, General Nicholas Herkimer, to his wounds. The Iroquois nation fought on both sides of the battle, and this marked the beginning of a civil war within the Six Nations.
Whoa, that is significant.
Now, during the Oriskany battle, the Americans that were besieged staged a sortie from Fort Stanwix, and they raided a nearly empty Native American camp. This, combined with heavy Native American casualties at the battle itself, was a significant blow to Native American morale.
I imagine so. Ugh.
So on August 10th, Benedict Arnold, you know that
I
name.
do know that name.
We haven't talked about him in a while.
Yeah, you mean the hero that fought on the American side? What's going on with him now?
And then the hero that fought on the British
Yeah,
side.
that's where yeah.
He leaves Stillwater, New York, for Fort Stanwix with 800 men from the Continental Army. He expected to recruit members of the Tryon County Militia when he arrived at Fort Dayton on the 21st. He could only raise about 100 because most of the militiamen had been at that bloody battle and they were not interested.
No.
So he had to resort to subterfuge. He staged the escape of a loyalist captive who convinced St. Leger that Arnold was coming with a much larger force than he actually had.
That's awesome.
I mean, even though he's an American traitor, he is still very good tactician.
Oh yeah. Well, and he's still commanding American troops at this point, so it's not he hasn't turned yet.
So when they received this news, Joseph Brant and the rest of the Native Americans, they're like, we're out.
That's right. That's a big army. No, thank you.
They took most of the remaining supplies with them as well. This forced St. Leger to raise the siege and go back through Oswego to Quebec.
Wow, what an effective strategy. That's really incredible.
So Arnold sends a detachment after them for a little bit, and then turns the rest of his forces to east to rejoin the American forces at Saratoga. So St. Leger's remaining men finally arrives at Fort Ticonderoga on the 27th, and their arrival was not in time to support Gurgyon, whose army was already being hemmed in by the growing American forces around him. All right, so that is where we're going to leave it today. So at the end of each episode, we honor one of our fallen angels in cooperation with HeroCards.us. So today we are honoring Mitchell Reed Cloud Jr. of the United States Army. His hometown was Hatfield, Wisconsin. He served in the U.S. Army, Company E, 2nd Battalion, 19th Infantry Regiment, 24th Infantry Division. He was honored with the Medal of Honor and twice with a Purple Heart. His date of sacrifice was November 5th, 1950, killed in action near Shangyong, North Korea. He was 25 years old. Mitchell Red Cloud Jr. was born in Hatfield, Wisconsin, along the Black River, some 60 miles northeast of where it joins the Mississippi. He and his parents, Mitchell, Mike, and Nellie Lillian, along with younger brothers Merlin and Randall, were members of the Winnebago tribe, later known as the Ho-Chunk. Mitchell attended high school in nearby Black River Falls, Wisconsin in 1941. His junior year, the world was at war in Europe and the Pacific. Although the United States had not yet officially entered the conflict, at age 17, Red Cloud received his father's permission to leave school and join the United States Marine Corps. He enlisted on August 11, 1941, 4 months before Imperial Japan attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Red Cloud was deployed to World War II Pacific Theater, assigned to Carlson's Raiders, the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. He fought in the Solomon Island campaign on the Isle of Guadalcanal. Like many Marines of the Pacific, Red Cloud developed a severe case of malaria. He recovered and refused his medical discharge. Returning to action, Red Cloud then served with A Company, 29th Marines, 6th Marine Division in the Battle of Okinawa. Suffering a bullet wound to the shoulder, Red Cloud was awarded a Purple Heart Medal and discharged from the Marine Corps in November of 1945, having achieved the rank of sergeant. He returned home, married, and started a family. Red Cloud had difficulty settling into civilian life, and in 1948 he returned to active duty, this time with the U.S. Army. He was assigned to Easy Company, Company E, 2nd Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, 24th Infantry Division. His unit was sent to Kyushu, Japan, and in July was among the first U.S. companies sent to Korea with the outbreak of war on June 5, 1950. By this time, Red Cloud was 25 years old, older than most of the men serving with him. As a proven combat veteran, Red Cloud was highly respected by the men of Easy Company. On November 5, 1950, Easy Company was positioned near Cheongong, North Korea, on Hill 123. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, Red Cloud was manning a listening post at the Hills Ridge, right in front of the command post, when he realized Chinese Communist forces were approaching. These forces instantly charged at him from the brush about 100 feet away. Corporal Red Cloud, armed with only a Browning automatic rifle, left the safety of his listening position. As enemy rounds struck him, he waved off a medic, wrapped his arm around a tree, and continued firing at the enemy onslaught. It delayed the attack long enough for Easy Company to coordinate its defense and evacuate the wounded. On April 3, 1951, General Omar Bradley presented the nation's highest military honor to Corporal Red Cloud's mother. The Medal of Honor citation reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty in Shangyong, Korea. 5th November 1950. Corporal Red Cloud, Company E, distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty in action against the enemy. From his position on the point of a ridge immediately in front of the company command post, he was the first to detect the approach of the Chinese Communist forces and gave the alarm as the enemy charged from a brush-covered area less than 100 feet from him. Springing up, he delivered devastating point-blank automatic rifle fire into the advancing enemy. His accurate and intense fire checked his assault and gained time for the company to consolidate its defense. With utter fearlessness, he maintained his firing position until severely wounded by enemy fire. Refusing assistance, he pulled himself to his feet and wrapped his arm around a tree, continued his deadly fire again, until he was fatally wounded. This heroic act stopped the enemy from overwhelming his company's position and gained time for reorganization and evacuation of the wounded. Corporal Red Cloud's dauntless courage and gallant self-sacrifice reflects the highest credit upon himself and upholds the esteemed traditions of the U.S. Army. His daughter, Anita Red Cloud, told Discover Wisconsin that she met the medic from her father's unit at a Korean War project event. She believes it's likely the medic was the last person to speak with her father. The medic recounted that Corporal Red Cloud told him, "Get me all the ammo you can and put it next to me, and then get everybody you can out of here." 2 days after his death, Easy Company recaptured Hill 123. They found that the bodies of the fallen U.S. soldiers had been looted by the Chinese communist soldiers, all except for Corporal Red Cloud. The Americans speculated that it was the enemy soldiers' way of honoring him. To recognize Corporal Mitchell Red Cloud Jr.'s service and sacrifice, U.S. Army garrison Camp Red Cloud, located in Ujibu, Korea, was named in his honor. On August 7th, 1999, the United States Navy commissioned the Military Sealift Command Shift, USNS Red Cloud, T-TAC AKR 313. The American Legion Red Cloud Post 250 in Adams Friendship, Wisconsin, is named in Corporal Red Cloud's honor. Other recognitions include veterans posts, parks, and roads around Wisconsin. Every 4th of July, the Ho-Chunk Nation celebrates Michael Red Cloud Jr. Day. Corporal Mitchell Red Cloud Jr. was laid to rest in the Decorah Cemetery in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. The monument there refers to him as the son of a Winnebago chief and warriors. His daughter Anita describes the location as by the Indian Mission, which is pretty much the hub of the Ho-Chunk Nation. She adds, "A person never dies until he's forgotten. And that's what's really important to me, that he's not forgotten." So, Corporal Mitchell Red Cloud Jr., we thank you.
Thank you.
All right, XO, please take us out.
All right. Well, dear listener, thank you so much for listening today, learning more about the American Revolutionary War. If you'd like to contact us about anything, this episode or former episodes, or maybe something you'd like to see in the future, there's a couple ways you can do that. Our email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com, and then feel free to email us there. We are also on X Twitter at US Navy. Okay, I'm drawing a blank. US Navy History Pod. Is it US Navy History Pod or USN History Pod? US Navy History Pod. So the at US Navy History Pod, that's where we're at. So you can X us or tweet us or whatever it's called now. Huh?
Still not triple X.
Not triple X. Although I guess you could post. No, never mind. I'm not even going to say that. Anyway, we have a Discord server. You can find out how to get there on the show notes. You can join up and talk to fellow listeners or even us. Beyond that, we are on YouTube, and you can not see us but listen to us in a different avenue. Feel free to rate us and let us know what you think, what you like, maybe what you don't, what you'd like to see, and we'll try to accommodate y'all. So thanks again for listening.
And with that, we're going to wish y'all fair winds and following sea. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.